News with Mike Cooper. A Syrian government spokesman, Jihad Makdisi, has denied that helicopters or heavy artillery were used in an attack on the village of Tremse, which opposition activists have described as a massacre. He dismissed as rushed a letter from the UN Special Envoy on Syria, Kofi Annan, alleging that tanks and artillery had been used. Jim Muir is monitoring events from neighbouring Beirut.
The Foreign Ministry spokesman, Jihad Makdisi, called a news conference in Damascus to insist that there had been no massacre at Tremse. It was, he said, a clash lasting several hours between regular army forces and armed rebels who opposed a political solution to the crisis. He insisted that attack helicopters and tanks had not been used in the assault, just armoured troop carriers and light arms, including rocket-propelled grenades. He said the targets were 5 buildings used as bases by armed rebels.
The US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton is continuing her visit to Egypt and meeting the country's military leaders today. A day earlier, she urged Egypt's first democratically elected president, Mohamed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood, to work with military leaders to help the move to democracy. Kim Khattas is travelling with Mrs. Clinton.
The American Secretary of State is here to discuss the democratic transition in Egypt with all those involved, including civil society. Today, she'll hold key talks with the country's top military commander, Field Marshal Mohammed Tantawi. Hillary Clinton will press on him the importance of returning to full civilian rule in Egypt. Although Washington is concerned about the military's recent power grab and wants to encourage the democratic transition, it probably doesn't mind that the generals will still be keeping an eye on the Islamists newly arrived to power.
Japanese troops have been airlifting supplies to people trapped in mountainous districts cut off by floods on the southern island of Kyushu. Residential areas have also been flooded in Japan's historic capital Kyoto, about 500 kilometres to the east of Kyushu. Charles Scanlon reports.
Japan's volcanic southern island of Kyushu has been battered by record rainfall in recent days, sending flash floods and landslides crashing down heavily wooded mountain slopes. Troops and police are concentrating their rescue operation on the northwest of the island, where some 5,000 people are cut off after roads were swept away. 24 people have been confirmed dead, and others are still missing after rivers burst their banks and inundated residential areas.
Japan's ambassador to Beijing has returned home for consultations on growing tensions over disputed islands in the East China Sea. Japan protested twice last week after Chinese vessels entered what it considers its territorial waters around the islands, known as Senkaku in Japan and Jiaoyu in China. Beijing has responded angrily to recently announced plans by the Japanese government to buy the islands from their private Japanese owner. The dispute is seen as a potential threat to cooperation between the countries. World News from the BBC. China says it has successfully recovered a warship which ran aground in disputed waters off the Philippines, a potential flashpoint in the growing territorial dispute between Beijing and its neighbours. Officials said the frigate had suffered minor damage after getting stuck late last week on a sandbank. The 6-monthly African Union summit has opened in the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. Proceedings are expected to be dominated by a new attempt to end a deadlocked leadership contest. Neither of the two candidates, South Africa's Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma or Jean Ping, the current Commission chairman from Gabon, secured enough support in January and are standing again. A team of British scientists has won a $10 million grant from the Gates Foundation to develop genetically modified crops that could benefit struggling farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. Researchers at the John Innes Centre in England will try to engineer wheat, maize and rice that need little or no fertiliser, helping farmers who can't afford to treat their crops. Tom Heap reports.
Fertiliser feeds the world, from the bread baskets of the West to the rice fields of Asia. But the poorest farmers can't afford it, and it's responsible for big greenhouse gas emissions. So a team at the John Innes Centre in Norwich are trying to engineer cereal crops which could get nitrogen from the air, as peas and beans do, rather than needing chemical ammonia spread on the fields. Success could revolutionise agriculture, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation want to help struggling maize farmers in sub-Saharan Africa.
Opponents of GM food say the crops will take many years to deliver, and shortages could be met through cutting waste. At least 35 people have been killed in a bus crash in southern Nepal. Most of the dead were Hindu pilgrims from northern India who were travelling to an annual religious festival. The bus apparently skidded in the wet and plunged off the road into a canal. BBC News.
Welcome to the Forum, a world of ideas from the BBC. Hello, I'm Bridget Kendall, and this week I'm in East London, on the banks of the River Thames, at London's only lighthouse. And here, high up in the lantern room at the top of the lighthouse, there's a fantastic panoramic vista. It feels as though I've voyaged to a different planet. In one direction, the tall skyscrapers of Canary Wharf, in the other, futuristic cable car pods suspended high across the water, and right across the river from me, the huge white dome of the North Greenwich Arena, where gymnasts from across the world will soon be competing in the London Olympics. And with so many people travelling to London from across the world this month for the Olympic Games, this seems the perfect spot to explore the concept of navigation. This week's Forum guests are waiting for me down below. Let me go down the narrow, winding stairs to find them. Well, here we are on the first level of the lighthouse. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good morning.
And before we discuss navigation proper, let me ask all three of you Forum panel members, what's your favourite mode of transport and why? Margaret Lincoln, you're Deputy Director at the National Maritime Museum at Greenwich, just across the river actually. In a phrase, what's your favourite way to travel?
Well, rather oddly for a maritime expert, my favourite way to travel would be on a stagecoach, because I've always wanted to see over those hedges on motorways, and I think a stagecoach would be the mode of transport to do that.
Have you experienced it?
No, but that's the other point. I would really love to be shaken about in a carriage, because contemporaries always complain so much about being bruised.
Andrei Kurkov, you're always travelling, dividing your time between the Ukrainian capital Kiev, where you base yourself as a writer, with its majestic Dnieper River, and here in the UK. So how do you like to travel?
Well, it's probably quite commonplace, but I like driving the car and traveling in a car with my family, because I started driving very late, at the age of 37, and when we have time, we travel to the mountains or to the Black Sea, to Baltic states by car, all 5 of us. And it's fun.
Interesting. You like navigating yourself?
Yes, I don't have GPS. I always get lost myself.
And what about you, Nick Ward? You're the Research Director of the General Lighthouse Authorities of the UK and Ireland. Your choice of transport?
Cycling. I'm a keen cyclist, both on-road and off-road.
Well, you know, it's interesting. None of you have said what's my favourite mode of transport. I thought you would, which is the train, especially when travelling through beautiful mountainous regions. You're not distracted by driving, you don't get car sick, and there's nothing more exciting and beautiful. But let's stay with you, Nick Ward. The General Lighthouse Authorities where you work is part of a larger maritime organisation called Trinity House, which is nearly 500 years old, and in fact, it was responsible for building this historic lighthouse where we're sitting now, here on the banks of the Thames. Looking out, it's pretty calm out there. There's no need to warn of perilous rocks or stormy seas in this particular area, so why on earth did they build a lighthouse here?
Well, I hate to disappoint you, but it wasn't actually a working lighthouse. It was used for training lighthouse keepers and the maintenance people. This, 30 years ago, was a hive of activity, and it was the centre for the manufacture and servicing of equipment for lighthouses all around the coasts of England, Wales and the Channel Islands.
And what sort of servicing do you need to do?
Well, in those days, quite a lot, because the lights were either gas or, in a few cases, still paraffin burners, but mostly large electric lights with bulbs of 3.5 or even 5 kilowatts. And the equipment used to run them was generally diesel generators on offshore sites, because there was no mains electricity, and they had compressed air foghorns, all of which required a lot of maintenance and a lot of equipment.
And absolutely vital that they work properly, because without them boats would crash upon the rocks if the lights didn't work.
Yes, and just as important nowadays, in fact, because 90% of our trade comes by sea. This country is